Swedish meatballs is one of those old world dishes that tastes better than it looks. This is not the simple version you can make in 20 minutes though, because that's not what this channel is about. This is a quality restaurant version that increases the flavor using a couple of tricks you've never seen before in any of my previous videos. And it's quite a feat to increase the flavor of Swedish meatballs and still have it be Swedish meatballs, because the very nature of the dish is defined by its mild flavor, very little seasoning, and in a cream sauce no less. Still, it can be done. This intensifies flavor perception with polyphenols as explained in Volume 3 of my cookbook series. I'm beginning with a piece of pretty tough meat. This is part of the end of a sirloin, I think, but you know, Russia doesn't really Russian butchers don't label things very well, so all it says when you buy it is beef most of the time, like this. But you can tell from this, got a lot of long fibers, not very much fat. This is going to be a very tough piece of meat to cook if you were to just cook it ordinarily style, but it's got a lot of flavor in it because this muscle was worked a lot, and that's really what you want for this. You want something that was that's pretty tough, so because you're going to grind it up anyway, but it's got a lot of flavor. So we're going to cut this up into cubes first. Now this is the size cubes you want. You want them to be about the size of your thumb, and once they're all cut up like this, you'll put them in a plastic box. You're cutting them in cubes for two reasons. One is to maximize the surface area for the enzymes to work, which you'll see in just a minute, and then also so that they're going to go through the meat grinder. Okay, I've got a couple of mushrooms here. They weigh about 60 grams in all. I'm just going to break them into coarse pieces into the cup of the stick blender, just to get the blender started. You don't need to chop them up or anything fancy. And I've got 250 milliliters, about a cup of water, but I'm not going to add all of it at once because it'll make it very hard to puree these smoothly. So I'm going to add about half the water. And then we'll do the puree. Then, when you're satisfied that you've got them pretty well pureed, we'll add the rest of the water and give them a little bit more. Now back to the container that had the beef in it. This pureed mushrooms is going to go over the top. And if you use a small container like this, you'll see that there's just enough liquid to submerge the meat. And this is going to begin working right away. You'll begin seeing the color of this change right away. But we're going to leave it out at room temperature for about an hour. Just put a lid over it loosely. Let it sit for 1 hour at room temperature. Now, while the mushrooms are doing their thing on the beef, we've got one slice of white bread, one slice of dense rye bread. I put some butter on each one, and I'm going to cook it in a pan here, starting off with a fairly cold pan on a medium heat. We've got plenty of time here while the mushrooms do their work on the beef, so we don't need to rush this at all. Medium heat. Let it begin cooking until it's crisp on one side, then we'll flip them, but only butter on one side. Now, after 6 or 7 minutes, you can flip these pieces over. Begin cooking the other side. Still the heat's medium. We're doing this slowly. And while this is going on, we can assemble the other ingredients. I have the coarse salt, brown sugar, a little dried tarragon, allspice berries. This is a bag containing Earl Grey tea. A whole tea bag is about 1 teaspoon, which is what you need. And also the Finnish tertiary additive spice blend that's also from Volume 3, 3/4 of a teaspoon of this. If you don't have this, you can leave it out. It'll still be good. This just adds an extra dimension to the flavor, again, as explained in Volume 3. I loaded those into the spice mill. I actually forgot to put out on the plate there the white peppercorns. I'm using just a little bit more. You'd be 1/4 of a teaspoon would be fine, but I'm adding just a tiny bit more, like 3/8 of a teaspoon of the white peppercorn. Another 7 minutes have passed. I'm going to flip it back over, and now I'm going to lower the heat down from 5 all the way down to 2. We're going to cook it real slow the rest of the way now. And finally, after the third 7-minute period, we're going to take these, transfer them off to a plate, and we'll reserve these until we need. Okay, it's been an hour now for this meat in the mushroom puree. You can let this go longer. You can let it go for 2 or 3 hours if you want to, but don't refrigerate it, and you know, don't go too long, because it will, I mean, obviously it'll rot eventually. Absolutely save this liquid, because this is going to be used in making the sauce. Okay, the meat transferred out. Okay, now this has done its thing. Now I am going to cover this and put it in the refrigerator. We don't want this to spoil, and it's going to be quite a few minutes before we're ready for using this. The pork here, which is quite fatty, don't use lean pork. The purpose of this is to get some fat in it, main purpose anyway, and white onion. Usually I use yellow onions or brown onions. This time actually white onion is preferable. You know, if you don't have it, you can use yellow, but this is actually better. So we've got the 160 grams of fatty pork here, 60 grams of white onion that is coarsely chopped. It's just going to go into basket here, give it a little mix around, and then this has to get fed through the meat grinder. Preferably you want to go through the meat grinder 2 times. After it comes out, clean the meat grinder internally and then put it through a second time, so you have a nice smooth finished product. If you only do it 1 time, you'll have little coarse chunks in the meatballs that really aren't pleasant, and they're certainly not traditional. Into the bowl of the food processor, you take this bread that you fried, basically, break it up into some reasonable sized pieces here, make it easier for the food processor to chew it up, and the sourdough bread as well. That's fine. After the first pass, you still have some pretty large pieces in there. That's okay, not a problem at all. Now I'm going to add that ground spice mixture. This will absorb some of the moisture and help chop up the bread more. Okay, still got some fairly large chunks here, not a problem. There's the egg yolk. There's the 45 mils of cream. And the final blend here. This is meat that went through the grinder 2 times, and you can see the texture now of this this bread. Excuse me. This is smelling really good, especially if you've got the finished spice mix from Volume 3. This smells really good right now. And we're just gonna mix this together. Don't over mix it, because you don't want to make the meatballs tough, but you need to make it fairly homogeneous. And you can use your fingers too. And the next step is to get a plate, sprinkle it with flour, and begin making small meatballs. Roll around, put it on the flour, and get the next one and repeat the process. It should have been enough for roughly 24 meatballs, depending on exactly what size you make them. Sprinkle them with flour, and you give them a little roll like this. And you begin heating a non-stick skillet on medium-high heat, about 7 out of 10, and with a little pat of butter in it. You're not using oil for this. We're in the far north, Scandinavia. We're using butter for everything. So I'll let this melt. Okay, the butter has melted, and normally I wouldn't put this many meatballs into a pan like this. This would be considered overcrowding, but Swedish meatballs are kind of an exception to that rule. They are actually supposed to be partly steamed, which is the problem when normally if you put too many meatballs in a pan, what happens, they exude moisture and they kind of steam each other. In this case, it's actually what you want. You want them partly fried and partly steamed. So it's okay to have them like this, but don't have them so shoved up next to each other there's no room at all. Then it's just going to be a mess. It's about like this. Find a large pan and do them about like this. Again, the heat's still on 7 out of 10. And after a few minutes, you begin turning them around gently. Make sure you don't break them up, of course. We're not looking for super dark browning here. We're just looking to crisp them up and firm up the outside. We're going to cook them some more in the sauce later. After a few minutes, you've got a good amount of browning on them. You can transfer these off to a bowl. And now we've got this mushroom puree that the meat was soaked in that goes into the pan. And we're going to begin cooking this slowly. And the meatballs are reserved off to the side. Next step is to prepare the sour cream, as you'll see. You whisk together the sour cream, or smetana in this case, and the dairy cream. As this mushroom mixture cooks, it curdles. You'll get kind of coagulated pieces in here. That's fine, that's what you want. It's going to be just fine in the end. Let it cook a little bit more. Bring it up to a simmer. I'm going to increase the heat just a little. Okay, it's as coagulated as it's going to get, it seems. And now we're going to introduce the cream and sour cream to this. And once this is mixed together well, this is fine. Now we can add the meatballs back into it, along with any juices that might have ran off of them. Get them down to a single layer. And we begin simmering the meatballs in the cream here. Now during this cooking phase, turn the meatballs over once in a while. You don't need to stir them constantly, of course. And you want to reduce this down until the sauce is quite thick and the meatballs are really glazed with it. And also, during this time, I'm going to add a little freshly ground nutmeg. As the sauce thickens, you need to taste it and adjust the salt. It'll need a little bit more salt, and it might need a little bit more white pepper. Don't use black pepper on this. That does not belong in this dish. Use white pepper if you need it, and certainly probably needs a little bit more salt. Finally, a little minced dill, freshly minced dill. You can use dried if that's all you have. And exactly how thick you want this gravy or sauce to be is up to you. You're going to use it to coat potatoes as well, typically, or pasta. So, you know, don't reduce it down to where there's nothing left, because then there won't be any sauce. But you want it pretty thick. You want those meatballs well coated. I'm very pleased to announce the release of Volume 3, The Focus on Food Chemistry. A new, completely different type of cookbook. If you watch my channel regularly, you know that the recipes I present are usually centered on meat or seafood and seldom vegetarian dishes. This new book is a departure from that norm. Only vegetables, fruits, eggs, and dairy are used in dozens of recipes here. The key here is that these recipes don't taste like typical vegetarian food. This isn't a bunch of salads and bean sprouts wrapped in pita bread. These are completely satisfying, hearty dishes that use the science of food chemistry to produce meat-like aromas and flavors. But don't worry, there's no weird chemicals involved, just ordinary foods and spices that you can get in any grocery store. This really is an entirely new approach. These are flavorful, filling meals produced by a distinctive cooking method and unexpected combinations of ingredients. Once you see how it's done and understand the method, you can apply these preparations to some of your own recipes and transform them into vegetarian dishes too. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online. If you want to know more about my adventures as a chef around the world and have some great laughs along the way, be sure to check out the video tour of my book, 40 Years in One Night. It's up on YouTube right now. Click the link. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.